Check, check, test 1, 2. How we sounding? Sounds good. Maybe I might turn myself up a tiny bit. See how that does. And let's get the camera on. Cool. We are live, I think. Hello and welcome to yet another Tuesday afternoon, evening stream. My name is Zaak Kerstetter. I run Catalyze Music Academy and I am an Ableton Certified Trainer. This is one of 2 streams I do every week. Tuesdays I do just kind of like hang out, talk about music production, people can ask questions, whatever kind of thing. And on Fridays we do a song feedback stream where people will send me tracks and I will listen to them and give them feedback. So if you are joining us live or if you are watching this video later on the channel, welcome. So for right now, I'm gonna kind of hang out for a little bit and start working on the sample pack song challenge, which is a monthly thing we're doing on the channel now. This is the second one we've done, and it's going to be due on Friday. And I'm going to be taking a listen to everybody's various projects they do for the sample pack challenge on Friday during the Friday feedback stream. So that's kind of my plan for right now, is just to kind of hang out and work on that a little bit. I haven't even started, but I'm going to start right now. And if anybody is in chat who is watching, wants to ask me a question, you are 100% more than welcome to do so. And it can be related to anything related to music or music production with Ableton Live. So yeah, so I'm gonna go ahead and take a dive into this. I have all the different samples here from the sample pack kind of just laid out onto different tracks. I honestly don't even remember what a lot of these sound like, even though I made them. So I'm gonna go through and maybe pick some of the samples, pick some of the loops that I like, that I think have some potential. I'm not even sure what kind of genre or style I'm gonna go for yet. It's very much up in the air as of right now. But we'll take a listen here and just kind of see what's going on, and that way you can get an idea of what things are sounding like. And I'm also just going to sound check it to make sure the levels are good. And I'm going to turn it down a tiny bit. You guys. Cool. All right, so we got some percussive stuff here. We got some bass sounds. So I got some bass sounds there. Little arpeggiated sound. This one I like a lot. I'm gonna just change the color on that one just to indicate that that's one I'll probably end up using. Both of these guys I think are good. In fact, I think this might be a core element to the song when I actually start diving into it. Got some cellos. I also like the harp quite a bit. Pad sound. That one's got some potential, I think. Piano could be kind of cool, and then we got some violins. All right, so we got a lot of like plucky arpeggiated things. So I'm actually gonna start with this piano. And I want to take this piano and probably turn it into something a little bit less piano. One of my favorite things to do with pianos is just hit the reverse button. That's a great way to just kind of like get a little bit more out of the pianos. And then, like I said, I want to turn this to something a little bit less piano-esque and a little bit more pad, more like an like atmospheric kind of sound. So what I'm going to do is probably toss like a hybrid reverb on here and like crank the settings super high. And try out some different modes on here. And we'll stick with just convolution for right now. Oops. Or just the algorithm, that's what I meant to do. So we'll give it a little bit of pre-delay. Something like that. The shimmer mode on the hybrid reverb is honestly really solid, and I really like it. So it's a great way to just like take something like this and just make it sound a little different. I'll try putting some vintage modes on it. Sounds kind of cool. We can also try playing around with the warping a little bit and make it longer. Sounds cool. It's a little slow, so what I'm going to do is just duplicate the whole clip and have one of them be at normal speed and one of them be longer. And that way I can switch back and forth between the two whenever I feel like it. Also, I would just like to mention, if anybody is just now joining us, right now I'm just kind of screwing around, hanging out, playing with some samples. But if you have any questions that are related to music production at all, feel free to toss them in the chat. And that's really kind of what this whole stream is about. All right, so we got this slow, shimmery kind of sound. And just to like really go for this kind of atmospheric kind of sound, let's also toss an echo on here. This is just gonna like be our atmospheric intro kind of sound. And we're gonna toss up more reverb on this. Cool. I honestly like that quite a bit. And then maybe I'll probably compress that a little bit just to bring it out a little bit more. Cool. So now we have this big echoey sound. I want to give it a little bit more motion, and one of my favorite ways to do this is to just toss a kick drum and then sidechain this kind of like atmospheric sound that has this very consistent kind of sound to the kick drum. So we got our kick drums over in our drum rack here, and kind of like that one. And we're gonna do a 4/4 thing to get started with, just to see how it sounds. And I'm gonna turn the tempo down a little bit just because I like things to be a little slower. We'll deal with fixing the kick later on, but for right now, all I need is that to happen so I can have a separate compressor that I'm going to sidechain from. I'm going to turn the sidechain, grab from here, make sure I just grab from just that one kick drum. Turn the threshold down. Turn the kick off. 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 Turn the kick Oh yeah, so it was getting a little bit too much of that, like you could hear the impact of the kick through the sidechain. So by giving it a little bit more attack, it's a little bit more of a smooth curve on that sidechain. So you still get that pulsing sound, but it's not doesn't have that like little hit each time there's a kick drum. We could turn this up even more. Something like that. So already starting with that, I'm feeling like that actually sounds kind of cool. It's a nice like ambient intro kind of pad sound that I think is working for me. So from here, I'm going to switch over to a different sound, probably one of these three sounds, because these are the ones I think sounded cool. I think I might have to turn some of the reverb down. I think I like this sound the best with the sound I already have. I think they work kind of the nicest. I'm also going to try this. Let's take a look at this one. Let's try doing a little slicing with the beats mode. This is a cool way just to get a little bit more out of your sounds. A little choppiness with it. Makes it a little bit more rhythmic. Or we just stick with the way it is. Either way is fine. Once again, I also would just like to point out, if you are watching and you have any questions related to anything with music production, feel free to toss those questions in the chat. Right now, I'm just kind of screwing around with some samples and kind of seeing what I can do to them. So we'll take something like this, and I want to tweak it a little bit, make it sound a little different. Maybe I'll toss like a little bit of a phaser on there, and maybe a little bit of chorus as well. These are like two of my favorite effects for just tossing on anything. And maybe a little bit of delay as well, just to see what happens. It already has a little delay, it sounds like, but and maybe a little bit like EQ8. So the issue I'm running into is that the notes don't really line up and are not working for me. So let me unreverse this and see if this sounds any better. Cool. I like those two together so far. And now we're gonna get some drums involved. So I actually have to do some work on the drum rack here. So right now we just have this kick drum, which is okay, but I don't know if I want to use the distorted one. So I've got this. I want to beef this up a little bit and make it a little bit more interesting. So we're going to toss some effects on this guy. Saturator on kick drums is one of my favorite things to do. Just really helps bring out a lot of the things I like about this kick. And another thing we can do for this kind of like 808 style kick is we can put a little bit of pitch envelope on here at the very beginning, and this will really emphasize the impact of it if I turn this up. So you get more of that impact. And so maybe I'll go up like an octave and I'll make the decay a little bit shorter. Yeah, it helps bring up that impact a little bit, which is something I like. Okay. And then from here, I honestly don't think we need to do too much more to it. I'll probably tweak it a little bit more later on. But for now, I'm just going to leave that the way it is. And let's check out our snare options. I like that one. I'm going to take these two. If you hold on the command key while you drag one sample on top of another, it layers the two of them together, which is really handy. What's up, Anton? How are you doing today? So we'll go ahead and just toss this note in here on our 2 and our 4. That's the wrong one. And let's start tossing some effects on this guy. We're going to want a little bit of reverb and a little bit of compression. Make sure this is on both of our snares. That is too much. Let's do just the convolution. Let's do the made for drums. And we'll do like the big snare. Turn the dry wet way down. Compress it. Turn the decay time way down. Sounds pretty decent. Well, Anton, we just started. So right now I am working on the sample pack song challenge, which is due on Friday. And this is literally the first time I'm actually having to go with these samples. So I'm going to see how much I can get done in the next couple days. But I've mostly just been hanging out, kind of going through my process of going through these samples, seeing what I like in there, and trying to make it happen. But because it's the Tuesday stream, you are more than welcome to toss any questions you have in the chat, and I will try to get to those as soon as I can. But right now I'm just screwing around, building out this drum kit a little bit, so I have some drums I can work with, but these are all samples from the sample pack. All right, so I got those two going, and then kind of like that hi-hat the best. So we're going to toss in some 8th note hi-hats right now, and then we'll probably tweak it later on. We're not getting super creative with the drum beat quite yet. All right, we're going to have to get more creative than that, though. We're going to go down to 16th notes. That pitch envelope on the kick is a little bit too much. I'm going to turn that down. All right, and then let's layer this up with the percussion and see what this does. Not in love with these samples for what I have going on. So I might need to go in here and start chopping these up and slicing them up and moving around and make them sound a little different. I'm gonna find whichever one I like the best, and then I'm gonna go in and start chopping it up. What if these are sped up? Actually, that's way better. I don't even do any chopping or slicing. Just double time it. I'm gonna try that for all these and see what happens. I think I like the third one the best. All right, there's a couple contenders in there. There's a couple ones that are kind of decent. But I might stick with the third one here for right now. What's up, Raj? How are you doing today? So how does the stereo imaging work in Ableton? What are the benefits of it? So the stereo imaging is a little strange if you are used to working with something like Pro Tools, where you either have like stereo or it's left or it's right. It's like very kind of one or the other. Live treats mono and stereo tracks basically the same. But in terms of like how you do it, there's a couple different ways to approach doing stereo imaging. So, I mean, we have panning just by default here, so we can just pan things to left and right. So I'm pretty sure YouTube's in stereo, so you should be able to hear that went just to the left side, or this goes just to the right side. So you can just move things to one or the other to help kind of like spread things out in your mix. Or if you want to, you can right click on this and you can hit select split stereo pan mode. When you do it this way, you essentially have one panning for your left side and another panning for your right side, which is a really interesting way to do kind of like uneven panning in different directions. So you can have like them go in different places. So that's another way to approach doing it, which I think some people, if you've been doing split stereo panning before, might feel more comfortable doing things this way. For me personally, it just makes it more complicated and doesn't really get me that big difference of results. So I tend to stick with just the regular stereo pan mode. But that's one option for playing around with the stereo. Another option for playing around, if you're talking more about like width controls, is in the utility audio effect. There's a width control right here. So this, if you turn it all the way down to 0, puts it in mono, essentially. Or if you turn this up, we'll spread it out to the side. And so it kind of like shifts it out to the side a little bit, which is pretty handy. So if you want something to like, if something already has a little bit of panning and you want to kind of accentuate that panning, you can do so with the width control. You can also right click on this and switch it to mid-side mode, which allows you to move things to the middle or to the side, which is how the utility used to work back in like Live 9. So I don't know how long you've been using Live, but if you used to use Live a long time ago, this is what this control did, and then they changed it a while ago. So you can switch from mid-side mode or just the width control. Or you can just put it in mono, or you can only put your bass in mono. But essentially all these controls are kind of like dealing with something that already has a little bit of stereo imaging already built into it. So something like this potentially where it's like the left and right side are not exactly the same. You're really kind of accentuating that and moving it farther to the side or more towards the center, depending on where you want it to be. And I hope that answers your question. If you have something more specific than that, let me know in chat. But yeah, stereo width is going to, width and imaging is going to be, I mean, I guess stereo imaging is technically like an image of the stereo width, which there's not a great way to do. You need third-party plugins to, or Max for Live to do imaging to actually see the width of everything. So hopefully, I think I understood the question. Hopefully that makes sense. Let me know. Brian, how are you doing today? So he said, the hybrid reverb blew my CPU through the roof. Been running Live 11 beta, but just installed 10.5, fresh start. Visual thinking, maybe that's CPU intensive. So I have definitely noticed a difference in CPU usage in 11.0.5. It's not massive. It's not like night and day difference, but it's definitely there and it's definitely noticeable. And I have also noticed specifically with hybrid reverb that it's not as bad as it used to be. Your mileage may vary a little bit on that, depending on your computer and what kind of processor you're running and just how it handles it. But I've been using the hybrid reverb pretty consistently since 11 came out, and it does feel like it's like that's one of the things specifically that is less CPU intensive than it was. So I hope it works for you as well as it did for me. I still get CPU issues a little bit more often than I'd like, but it seems like with every decimal point they add to Live 11, they're dealing with CPU stuff. So I've definitely noticed it go down. And then your other question, Brian, was what's happening when you select reduce latency when monitoring? So you're talking about the option up here for reduce latency when monitoring. I'll have to double check to make sure there's nothing else going on here. But basically when this is turned on, when you basically have audio going into a track, like you have a live mic or you have like a live input, it will specifically try to minimize the latency on that track or potentially multiple tracks. I'm not sure. I think it works on multiple tracks. So that you're getting the least amount of latency there. This might increase CPU usage a non-insignificant amount. So that might be something you might be running into if you are dealing with CPU stuff. But the idea behind reduced latency when monitoring is basically when you're recording, it's trying its best to minimize your input latency. But when you're not recording, it's not trying as hard to reduce latency, is my understanding. And hopefully that answers your question. Let me know. But I for the most part, keeping that off. And that should only really make a difference when it comes to audio. I don't think this makes any difference for MIDI coming in. All right, and then Anton, you guys are just hitting me with all the questions all right in a row. This is great. So Anton was asking, do you have any creative ways to use self-oscillating filters? Describe what you mean more specifically about self-oscillating filters. Are you talking about like cranking up the resonance on a filter and then using that to oscillate something? Describe exactly what you mean there a little bit more, Anton, just so I know what's going on. Yeah, it should be more than turning on direct monitoring in the interface. I honestly, like, this is one of the very few controls in Live that I've not spent a lot of time like testing out exactly how much of a difference it makes. I tend to not really have a whole lot of latency problems without it, but I feel like maybe I'll do some test runs before the next stream and see if I notice a huge difference. But I usually just keep it turned off because latency is usually not a big issue. Yeah, I appreciate you guys having all these questions. And then while I'm waiting for more of you, I see there's a bunch more people watching. So anybody who has questions, thoughts, they don't have to be about directly music production. You just want to talk about music, you want to talk about life, whatever. Feel free to toss that in the chat. This is very much just kind of like hangout kind of stream. So yeah, so when doing something like that, I honestly don't end up doing that a lot actively, doing the self-oscillating thing where you like crank up the res. Let me first switch this to like one of the filter modes, crank up the drive, and then turn this up. Let me put like a little bit of crackle going through it. I mean, I suppose you could do some fun stuff with like LFOs on it. To me, to be honest, it seems like an overly complicated way to generate a sound, to do oscillation, just because you can do and just have an oscillator to do it automatically. I'm trying to think if I can think of anything like where I'd use this for in like actual music production. Probably for just weird sound design stuff, like have some automation like moving this up as the filter is also moving. You quantize it. It only applies for the envelope. Do these sound any different if you switch them up? They sound basically the same. I know a number of people who do that kind of thing when it comes to like modular synthesizers. They'll just have their filter and then they'll use that as an oscillator, just in case they need an extra oscillator. But I feel like you're really just kind of spoiled for choice when it comes to oscillators in any kind of digital audio situation. So off the top of my head, I'll think about it a little bit. See if I can think of any interesting kind of creative uses for it, but it's not something I tend to do a lot in my production, just because it's easier. Or often, yeah, let's try some at different. Let's turn these down a little bit so we don't clip. I guess that's kind of cool. You could do something like this and then like put it through a delay. And just like do some weird sound design that way. That's actually kind of cool. Okay, here's my solution, or here's my my creative use. 2 filters, whatever frequency you want, a little bit of modulation on one of them, and then run it through a grain delay with the pitch set to 12 and the spray and the frequency set pretty low. And then just start moving this stuff around. All right, I'm gonna have to play around with this some more. This is fun. Yeah, I'm into it already. All right, yeah, I'll have to play around that some more and kind of see what I can do with it. So we'll come back to this maybe in a minute, because I might have some fun with that. But Brian was asking how to set the clip length before you record for them for all the clips in that strip. So you mean track. So there are, off the top of my head, 2 ways to do that. Method number 1 is have a push. On the push, there is a fixed length button. So you hit the fixed length button, You choose whatever length, and then you hit record, and it will record for exactly that long. The other way to do it involves using the IAC driver, which is a little complicated, but really cool if you want to get into it. And if you do, let me know, because it's going to take like 10 or so minutes for me to explain, but can do lots of stuff. All right, I'm going to go ahead and save this, and we're going to start a new project. All right. Brian, are you on a PC or on a Mac? Because this makes a difference here. I know, Brian, we can totally do it now, but it's just going to take a minute. So if you are on a Mac, great. What you need to do is you need to turn on the IAC driver. And I think I have a video on the channel about this if you want to check it out. The easiest way to do this is search for the audio MIDI setup. It'll normally open up just the audio setup. So what you're going to do is go to Window and hit Show MIDI Studio. This will show any MIDI controller plugged into your computer. And bear with me because, like I said, this is going to take a few minutes, but it's actually really cool. And there should be an option called IAC driver in the MIDI window. You're going to double click on that. Where it says device is online, you're going to click the little check mark there, and then the IAC driver will be turned on. That's all you need to do. Just double click on IAC driver, click the box for devices online, and then you're good to go. Now what you can do is in your preferences in Live, if you go to the MIDI tab, you'll have an option for IAC driver down here. There might be a Max for Live device that does this automatically. I'll have to look into it. But this is the way I know how to do it off the top of my head. So under the input for the IAC driver, you're going to make sure remote is turned on. And underneath the output to the IAC driver, you want to make sure track is turned on. So input, remote, output, track. Also, while I'm explaining this, if anybody else is out there watching, number one, feel free to like, comment, subscribe, say things in chat, whatever, or ask me questions. That's what I'm here for. So any questions you got related to music stuff, toss it in the chat, and I will try to get to it as soon as possible. Okay, so we got input, remote, output, track. Now what you can do is on an empty MIDI track, you can send MIDI out to the IAC driver. So basically, if I put a note in here, yeah, you don't need track to be turned on for the input. The only one that matters is remote, and then output is track. So when you send track as an output in your MIDI 2, you can now send MIDI out to the IAC driver. So the IAC driver is basically an imaginary space that we're going to send MIDI out of Live, and then we're going to send it back into Live to MIDI map it. So basically, we're going to take this note right here. It's just MIDI note C3. We're going to send it out of Live and then back in. And when we send it back in, we can MIDI map it to anything, anything you want. So for example, if I hit Command M and I select one of the clip slots over here, if I hit the spacebar, it's going to play this clip. It's going to send that MIDI note out to the IAC driver, and then it's going to map it to this clip slot right here, like that. So when I play this note, it's going to trigger the clip launch right here. So say you want your clip to play for 2 bars. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set up this clip I'm gonna make it longer. So this is going to trigger the recording right here. It's gonna play for 2 bars. I'm gonna send another MIDI note. It's gonna stop it. So if I hit play here, it's going to start recording. It's gonna record for 2 bars. It's gonna get the next MIDI message, and then it's gonna loop it. That's the workaround that I use for pre-recording different loop lengths. And you can do this for multiple clips across multiple tracks, or have sequences of loops all being recorded. But this is the other way to record multiple, or have preset recorded lengths. And it's kind of a pain to set up, but once you get used to it, it's actually works really well and it's pretty easy. Brian, let me know if that makes sense. All right, we got a bunch of questions. Yeah, Brian, check out the video I have on the IAC driver on the channel, and that way you can kind of take a look at it again if you want. So yeah, I got a bunch of questions. Yeah, I leave my IAC driver on all the time, just in case, sometimes I use it, sometimes I don't, but it's always there. All right, got 3 questions in a row, so bear with me. I'm gonna try to go through these chronologically. Sarav was asking a follow-up question. What's the secret to clarity in a mix and sound? Artists like Skrillex, Troy Boy have really clean mix sound. I'll always try to figure that out. I mean, that's kind of the $1 million question. Getting those clean mixes, I've got some really basic general advice that you can try that has worked a lot for me in mixing or working on tracks. Number 1, don't overthink it. A lot of people think that you need to use lots of fancy plugins and lots of crazy things to get clean mixes. A lot of times less is more when it comes to your mixing in terms of processing. So don't over process your sounds. A lot of times a lot of the time that I spend mixing, I'm deleting things. I'm removing things from the mix, because the less sounds that you have simultaneously, the easier it is to mix. And that's something you'll notice a lot with artists like Skrillex or Troy Boy, where they'll have you hear one sound at a time, and then it's the next sound, and then it's the next sound, then the next sound. And that does make it a lot easier to mix than having 30 layers all happening at the same time. So less is more. Don't overthink it. Don't overprocess it. Number 2, it all comes down to listening. The difference between somebody who's amazing at mixing and somebody who's okay at mixing has nothing to do with gear or anything like that. It comes down to how closely do you listen? How much are you paying attention to what you're hearing when you're mixing? So the thing I recommend everybody to do when you're working on your mixes is, say you've done the first couple rounds you're mixing. You're like, okay, I've done a couple rounds. I got it kind of roughly where I want to be. What you should do is sit down, listen to your track, and see if you can identify every individual sound in your song. And then listen to what sounds are grabbing my attention the most. What are the sounds that my brain naturally gravitates towards? And then ask yourself the question, is that what I want my audience to be focusing on? And this might differ a lot for different styles of music and different genres. So for example, if you're making EDM, the most important thing, most likely, is going to be the kick drum. You cannot hear the kick drum through everything else, then people don't know how to dance to it. And so that's a problem. But after kick drum, it's probably, a toss up between vocals and bass or bass. And then maybe right after that, in terms of importance, might be snare drum. And maybe after that, it might be either melody or chords. And after that might be percussion. And after that might be sound effects. So there's a hierarchy of the most important sounds to the supporting character sounds. And what happens is our brains naturally gravitate towards things that are loud. So what you can do when you're mixing is you can shift your listener's attention to different sounds just by making them louder than everything else. And so as you go through and you listen to your track, think of, okay, what are the most important sounds? What are the medium important sounds? And what are the least important sounds? And when I close my eyes and I listen to this, what is my brain gravitating towards? What am I paying attention to? And then go through like, okay, first thing I hear is this, next thing I hear is vocals, next thing I hear is drums, next thing I hear is this, and then make changes to your volumes based off of what you're hearing the most and what you're hearing the least. So I think just building your ears and just really listening to that, and like having reference tracks that you do that to, just like as you're listening to songs, like what are you hearing the most, and that's the most important sound in that song. So just going through and really working on your listening skills is probably the best thing you can do to become better at mixing. Because other than that, it's just like, okay, you change volumes, you EQ things, you compress things a little bit. The skill sets of mixing are not that hard. It's the ear to know when you're going in the right direction versus when you're going the wrong direction. That's the hard part. So that's what I recommend more than anything else, is practice that a lot. Practice mixing your friends' songs. Practice mixing your own songs. Like really spend some time. It takes a long time, but I think a lot of it does come down to mixing skills. Unfortunately, that's not like a really like technical answer. It's not like, EQ your snare at 50 hertz or whatever. Did my little message say my chat is disconnected? Hopefully that means everything's okay. Everything else looks fine. Chat, I hope you're still there. So yeah, sorry that's not like a really technical answer, but I do think that that's super important. Kyle, let me do one more thing about mixing. The other thing that is really helpful is making a to-do list when you're mixing. So when you sit down to make a mix, listen to the whole song start to finish, and then write a list of things you need to do. What are the things you're noticing, and then do those things. The biggest issue I've found with people with mixing is they waste a lot of time like turning something up by a decibel and then down by a decibel and a half, and then up by 3/4 of a decibel and then down by half a decibel. You end up wasting a lot of time changing your mind about things. So make a to-do list when you're mixing. Do everything on the to-do list, and then start over. Listen to the whole thing, start beginning to end. Make a to-do list, and then knock those things out. So yeah, that's kind of my general mix advice. But definitely let me know if you want to talk more about it, because I obviously could spend a lot of time just talking about mixing. So Kyle was asking about what my favorite synth is, assuming I use them. So yeah, honestly, these days I'm mostly, as far as synths go, use in-the-box live stuff for the most part. Obviously, Serum is everybody's favorite. Serum just does everything really well, and if you're like looking to invest in a synthesizer plugin, Serum's not going to let you down. So yeah, it'd probably have to be that. Although I do have a soft spot in my heart for like weird synths like Absinthe. There's a few others out there that I've been using for a long time that are, they're not great synthesizers, but they're like, they've just been in my life for a long time, so I love them. As far as like non-synthesizer third-party plugins, anything that Valhalla makes, I think is amazing. I say this almost every stream when people ask me about plugins, but go download Valhalla plugins because they're 100% worth it and they're super affordable. And then I'm also a big fan of everything FabFilter makes. So if you are looking to buy plugins, Valhalla and FabFilter are the two companies that I use the most, with Native Instruments probably in third place behind that. But most of my synthesis and most of my sound design these days is Wavetable or Operator, which are both live devices. Let me know if you have other questions about plugins. We can definitely dive more into that as well. Does somebody want to type something in chat to just make sure chat is working? I got a message saying that chat got disconnected and then it's reconnected, but I haven't seen anybody type anything. So let me know you are still alive out there. All right, I'm gonna butcher your name. Auriculum? Auriculum? I don't know. Okay, cool. Thanks, Cal. Aricum. Yeah, hopefully that's how you say your name. So he's asking about what's your approach regarding parallel compression on drums? Try to create nested drum groups in Live 11, but somehow I overcomplicate the process. That is a fantastic question. So I think a lot of it comes down to kind of a workflow and what it is, how you like to progress your drum ideas. I've got a very specific way that I like to do it. That is like there's a couple step process to how I kind of like where I start with my drums to then how I process them and then deal with them later on. So if we're talking about drums, let me just grab a drum rack. See if my drums are back on line here. None of those are useful. We'll just grab a drum kit. So normally I will be building my drum rack from scratch, just picking up samples, tossing them in there, and I start them all in one drum rack. And I will, I'll put a few effects on here and there. I'll toss a saturator or like little bits of effects onto different drum sounds. And then I write all of my MIDI in one place. So we will write again a really fancy drum beat here. So yeah, so here's my fancy drum beat that I wrote. And again, everything is all in one drum rack, and I've done very minor amounts of processing here, but I might have done a few effects here and there. So once I get to a certain point in the song, usually as I get closer towards the mix stage of working on something, I'm actually just going to put this in the arrange view so we can see it a little easier. What I will do is I will basically take each one of these drum sounds out of the drum rack and give it its own individual track. And to do that, the easy way I do it is you can click on this little triangle over here in the session view, which gives me each one of my drum sounds individually. I'm going to right click on it and hit extract chains. So now this one is just my kick. I know this has nothing to do with parallel compression yet, but I promise you I'm getting there eventually. And then I have the snare guy. Is that the right one? I use snare too. So I'm going to extract chains here for my snare. And I can honestly just leave the hi-hats there. So this one is my snare. This one is my hi-hat. And then I move them all next to each other. So even though they all started as one drum rack, which makes it easier for writing MIDI, I now have them all on separate tracks with all of their MIDI and everything here. Then what I'll do is I will take all these guys and put them in a group. This is now my drum group. And now I can start doing my more kind of fancy or more kind of detail-oriented kind of drum processing here, because I have each drum sound on its own track, as well as the group here. So if I just purely wanted to do like a little bit of parallel compression on the entire drum group, I could just make a return track, toss a like glue compressor on that, and then send the entire drum group over to my glue compressor. That's most likely how I would set that up. And that way, if I say I only wanted to do like a little bit of parallel compression on like specific drum sounds, I could also do that individually here or individually here. So I get a lot of control here when it comes to like applying different kinds of effects to different sounds. Also, I would have like my snare specifically go to the reverb individually, so I can get the exact amount of reverb to my snare. So that's kind of the process that I do. And that way I don't have to do a lot of like compressors inside of the drum rack, inside an effects rack, inside of a drum rack, which does become very kind of like It's like those Russian dolls where you have like effects inside of a rack, inside of a rack, inside of a rack, and it becomes a little bit more confusing in terms of which effects are going where and how you're processing your sounds. So this way, everything starts in one place. I write all of my MIDI in one place, and that makes it very easy to do all that stuff. I then extract everything, and then I can do all of my processing with each one of my drum sounds getting its own individual track. Keep in mind, though, that anything that I'm doing here with like each one of these sounds on its own individual track, I could do while it's all inside one drum rack. But for me, just visually, aesthetically, workflow wise, this looks nicer and it's easier for my brain to comprehend and understand exactly where all my effects are. So that's kind of the process behind it. Hopefully that makes sense. Again, I feel like this is kind of a roundabout way to talk a little bit about parallel compression with drums. If you're looking for like specific settings and how I've kind of like line that up, we can also talk about that. But I was assuming you're talking about routing and where I put my compressors and things like that. So if I wanted to have an individual compressor on the kick, snare, or hi-hat, I could put that on the individual track. If I wanted to do like a bus-based compression, I could do it on the whole group, or I could do my parallel compression using my return tracks. So it gives me maximum flexibility when it comes to putting compressors literally anywhere I want them to be. So again, hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully that's useful. Hopefully that's the question you're asking. Sometimes it can be a little hard with chat, making sure I actually understand what you guys are talking about. Sweet. So that was a really awesome series of questions from you guys. If anybody is just now joining us, you can also toss your question in chat, and I will try to the best of my ability to answer your question. Whatever you're into. Cool, awesome. Yeah, I'm glad that was helpful. There's so many different ways to kind of route, especially your drum processing, and I think a lot of it comes down to your kind of own individual workflow and what makes sense for you. But this is kind of the process I've been using for a while, and it kind of like, okay, each part of the process I get to focus on, okay, writing the drums first, and then doing basic processing on the drums next, and then doing like mixing on the drums / doing interesting routing, volume controls, all that kind of stuff, all in one place. One thing I would like to point out, when you are doing the extracting chains, the track volume doesn't go with it. So if you, for example, if I have this drum rack here and I turn the track volume down and then I extract the chain, the new track volume, or the one that got extracted, goes back to 0 dB. So just watch out that like it will reset your volume when you do the extract chains thing. So you need to remember just to turn things back down after you've extracted them. The other thing that happens is that any effects that are outside of the drum rack do not go with it. So if we had like a filter delay right here, I'll show you right here. So if I do something like this, and I extract this hi-hat, you can see the new track is at 0 dB, and it does not include the filter delay because it was outside the drum rack. But if there's an effect inside the drum rack, that will go with it. Hopefully that makes sense. Things to watch out for. Also, if you guys are enjoying the stream, go ahead and hit the like button or whatever. That would be super cool. So Brian, you are still running into issues with CPU overload. And your question is sampler or synth. I'm assuming your question means which will be less CPU intensive, and the answer is almost always going to be sampler. Samplers don't really need to do a lot of processing to do what they do. They just play a sample. Whereas a synthesizer has to do math to generate the oscillator. And so that ends up taking up more CPU than a synthesizer. Yep. Yeah, in fact, that's a great way to save yourself some CPU is basically resample a synthesizer into a sampler, and then it should be very light on CPU. In fact, I also made a video on that on the channel not too long ago, maybe a couple weeks ago. And then Auriculum is asking, do you leave crash cymbals and rides out of the parallel compression chain? Usually, yes. But that depends a lot on a lot of things. It depends on how many sounds I have. In this particular example, I just did kick, snare, and hi-hat. But I would also have my other drum sounds also in the drum group here. So if I had crashes or things like that, they would also exist there. One of the things I've found about sounds that exist in really high frequency ranges, like the 10,000 plus frequency range, namely things like crashes and cymbals and hats, they don't need a lot of compression usually because they don't have a lot of competition. There's not a lot of sounds that live up in that 10,000 plus hertz frequency range. So I usually end up not needing to do a lot of compression on the beginning because they're already very loud and they stick through the mix pretty well. This may vary a little bit depending on what your drum setup is. If you're like, are you dealing with like, did you set up mics and record an actual drum set? Or are you dealing with electronic music? You're dealing with rock music, it really kind of depends on a lot of factors. But if I do any parallel compression on these cymbals, it will probably be pretty minimal because they just don't need it because they already stick out of a mix, in my opinion. But that's one of the nice things about doing it this way is that I can individually send different amounts of parallel compression to each one of my tracks. So instead of doing it as the entire group, each one has its own setting here, or own send knob. They can be exactly the amount or not amount that I want, which is way easier than trying to do it inside of a drum rack. Yeah, the more I think about it, the harder it sounds to do parallel compression inside of a drum rack. I guess you do it with a bunch of like racks with different chains, like an instrument rack with an empty chain and then a compression chain, but this to me seems way easier. Sweet. Anybody else got any questions in chat? Any things that they want to get into talking about? Been fantastic questions so far. It makes the whole stream go by super fast when you guys have lots of questions for me. All right, I'm gonna jump back to the other song I was working on. And I'm definitely gonna play around with the self-oscillating filters a little bit more later on. Awesome, thank you. I really don't want to fuck up your name, Auriculum. I appreciate it quite a bit. Will, I normally stream on Tuesdays and Fridays. So Tuesdays both Tuesdays and Tuesday and Fridays are both 5 to 7 p.m. Mountain Time. So I don't know what time zone you're in. Tuesdays are going to be the kind of like this hangout office hours, just chat about anything and whatever you guys want to talk about. And then on Fridays I do the song feedback stream where people send me tracks and I take a listen to them. I am potentially going to be playing around with switching up the streaming schedule a little bit in the future. I'm not sure when it will be or what will be happening, but there will probably be more streaming happening eventually once I get my schedule kind of set up a little bit more. So Raj was asking, who is my favorite producer? Hands down, it has to be Lorne, Lorn. He's just the best at everything. His music just sounds better than everybody else's. Other than that, Triphonic is another one of my all-time favorites. Amon Tobin, another one. Amon Tobin's more recent stuff has not been quite as good in my opinion, but amazing producer. As far as like newer, younger producers, I think Igloo Ghost is an absolute genius. I think his stuff's amazing. What's the other one I was thinking about? Why am I blanking on his name? He's does classical music with crazy bass. You know the guy. You know the guy I'm talking about. I don't know why I'm blanking on his name. We talked about him on stream like 2 weeks ago. It's the kind of thing I'll stop thinking about and then I'll remember it. Who else have I been listening to a lot recently? I've been listening to a lot of like producers from like Russia and China recently. There's like some really cool, weird, interesting electronic music coming out from scenes out there. But Lorne, favorite producer of all time, hands down. So King Wisdom was asking which version of Ableton you need to get Operator. That is the suite version of Live, or if you're using the trial version is the suite version. So if you're using the trial, you get it. Otherwise, you have to upgrade to suite, which I honestly think is worth it. I've had conversations about people about whether it's worth it to upgrade to suite, and I can't even imagine not having suite anymore. There's so many useful features in it. But Operator is definitely one of the best reasons to upgrade to suite if you don't have it. Thank you, Will. I'm glad you are enjoying channel. I appreciate it. I'm super stoked. We're getting fairly close to 2,000 subscribers, which is pretty awesome. That was like one of my goals for a while. So hopefully I'll be hitting that in the next like couple of weeks. I don't know what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna do something special for that, but I don't know what it's gonna be. Maybe I'll do like a stream every day of the week whenever it happens or something. Sounds like a lot of streaming. Oh, Apache. That's the name I was thinking of. Apache is probably one of the like newer up and coming producers who I think is just an absolute genius. Sweet. So anybody else got any questions for me? Feel free to toss those in the chat whenever you want. I'm gonna go back to playing around with this guy and kind of seeing what I can do to it. Might do some like pitching up or something. And maybe tone down some of the frequencies on this guy. And maybe a tiny bit of delay will be kind of cool. And for those of you guys who are either new to the channel or new to the stream, what I'm working on right now is the sample pack challenge. This is the second sample pack challenge we've done on the channel. There's a video on the channel somewhere where you can get all the info about downloading the samples, what to do with them. But this is going to be due at the end of the week. So I literally just started mine. But if you would like to work on the sample pack and send me whatever you come up with it, that'd be super cool. That's kind of the whole point of the sample pack challenge. So that's something you might be into. Basically, I made a sample pack, gave it out to everybody in the community, and then they can make a song with it and do whatever they want with it. And then this Friday, I'll be going through and taking a listen to them. All right, it turns out I do not like this kick drum, so we might need to go in here and fix that. And also, I'm not feeling that snare either. All right, I feel like it just needs another layer to it. I think that's probably the easiest solution. So I'm just gonna go in and see if I can find a kick that sounds halfway decent. Something like that. If you guys don't know, this is the best key command in Live. If you hold down the command key, or I think it's the alt key if you're on PC, when you drag a sample into a drum rack, it layers it with a sample that's already there. So now way better. And I might give this one a little bit of a fade in, just a couple milliseconds. Cool. I already like that way better. And then we have these two snares here that I layered together, and I put a tiny bit of hybrid reverb and a little bit of compression on. And I'm not feeling it. It's just not doing it for me. It's getting a little better. Yeah, all right. That's workable for right now. A lot of times I try not to get too deep into drum production until later on in the song, because it's such a rabbit hole where you can just like keep on tweaking and adding more effects. A lot of times what I like to do with the drums is just like get the bare bones done early on so it sounds okay, just so you can like actually start working on the song and actually start writing something. Otherwise you just end up like working on drums forever, and it takes forever, and it doesn't help you out that much. So yeah, so that's all I've done with the drums so far. Okay, that's workable. Let's grab our arpeggiator guy, see how this sounds. I'm not sure I feel about the tempo. I can't decide if I want to be slower or faster. Just gonna play around with some of those samples and see what else I got in here that could be kind of cool that would work with this. That could work. That could be something useful. And once again, just so everybody knows, right now I'm just kind of like screwing around, just playing with some samples. If you have any questions or things that you'd like to talk about, feel free to toss them in the chat, and I will get around to it as soon as I can. There we go. That's something I can work with. Cool. I actually like that. That's going in the song. I don't know what the song's gonna sound like yet, but that's going in there. All right, so one of the things I like to do a lot, just to impart a little bit of, I don't know, not really wisdom, I guess, is that anytime I come up with something that I think is kind of cool, that I think has some potential, namely this, I think it sounds cool. I think it has the potential of being like a core part of the song. What I'll end up doing is I will end up duplicating the entire track, so I have 2 versions of it. And then on one of the 2 versions, I will do some experimentation. So I will try just switching up settings a lot and kind of just like going wild with it. And that way, if I screw it up, if some of my experimenting takes me down a rabbit hole and I end up not liking it, I can always go back to the original version and I still have the version that I think sounds cool. But best case scenario, this will sound cool, and I'm gonna tweak this one, and then this will also sound cool, and then I can use the 2 and layer them together. So for example, one of the fastest and easiest ways to try this out is just try pitching things up and down an octave in either direction. Try going up another octave. Or down an octave. Cool, that works. And we'll duplicate it one more time just to see where it takes us. like I want to have one that's faster. All right, so Brian's asking, have I seen the Gomtrum plugin creates graphics from MIDI? Looking for a plugin that would add effects to a QuickTime movie with MIDI output. Are these devices CPU hogs? So I have not seen that plugin. I will check it out and I will let you know what I think about it. But generally, anything that does video processing or editing in any way tends to be pretty CPU intensive. I'm gonna check out this Max for Live device. Yeah, so that seems super cool. But yeah, that I can't imagine that's not gonna just wreck your CPU. I've done a bit of video processing stuff in Max, and it's super fun, and it's really cool to like connect it together with your audio coming from live, and you can like make the audio affect the video and do some cool stuff with it. In fact, I've got another video on that about doing visuals in Max for Live that is worth checking out if you want to like build something like that from scratch. But yeah, it is pretty CPU intensive, especially if you're doing generative stuff. If you are like generating visuals from scratch, that's a lot more intensive than just playing a video. So I'd watch out for that. But if it's in Max for Live, any MIDI mapping or any MIDI stuff you want to do inside of Live, you can use that to control that device. So it's really easy to have a MIDI controller that you could use for like playing music, but also use it to affect the videos. That's pretty straightforward. That's pretty easy to do. What I've seen a lot of people do is have two computers. They have one computer that does the video stuff, and then they have a different computer that does the audio, and they'll connect them. They'll connect them together, either through Wi-Fi or like an Ethernet cable or something like that, and you can do some really fun stuff with it. But I will check out this one specifically. It looks kind of like a cooler version of something that I made a while ago. Yeah, it seems super cool actually. I'll definitely have to check that out. All right, should be back now. If the mic thing was cutting off, it's a CPU thing on my end. My computer doesn't like it when I do lots of things while I'm streaming. So it will hopefully catch up eventually. But Kyle, thanks for popping by. Thanks for coming. I appreciate it. Cool. Yeah, that happens almost every stream, at least at one point. But it does mean that I'm trying to do too many things right now. Yeah, the image will come back in a moment, probably, hopefully. And that the image thing is probably just a bandwidth thing on somebody's end, but it might take a second to get back to full resolution. It's weird. OBS still receives my microphone volume, but it doesn't send it to YouTube. And so I've got to reset OBS to fix it. It's kind of a pain. Cool. Well, I'm going to save this, at least for right now. So since my CPU is getting a little bit weighed down, I might hang out for a few more, like another 10 or so minutes, in case anybody else has any questions or anything that they want to get into. But we get to the stage where like my computer starts getting overheated and tired from streaming. Is this working still? Hope so. And that's always okay. That should be good. And that's all. No, it's always not a great sign when my computer is telling me, giving me all kinds of error messages. But I very much appreciate everybody who has showed up for the stream so far, asked lots of really great questions, including some really tricky ones. But if we want to talk, let's end this talking about a little about video stuff. Because Brian, it seems like you're into that. Let's see if I can pull one of these guys up. Let's see which version this is. Okay, I don't remember making this one, but we'll see how this works. So you can just start building your own max visuals. All right, let's try some drum and bass here. Let's see. Oops. Oh, it's not working. All right, I'll try a different one. I've made so many of these different video things. I don't remember which ones are the good ones. Let's try this one. Okay, here we go. So here's one of them that I made that right now doesn't look that cool. But if we tweak some of the settings here, that doesn't look cool at all. That's all on there. Yeah, sometimes I need to go through and find the good version of this. Wonder if I just called it. Okay, here it is. I hope. Let's get rid of this one. There we go. This is the one that's the best one, potentially. You can do lots of stuff too. And you can just build this stuff from scratch. So the one you mentioned looks super cool and is probably a lot more complicated and a lot nicer than the one I built. But this one I just built myself. So you can do some really fun stuff with just like going into Max and kind of programming this stuff yourself. Oh, interesting, Will. So you're having issues getting it to show in presentation mode. I'm assuming you already tried this, but we can just kind of go through it and kind of see. There's like one thing that people always miss when they are saving their max patches, but I'll show you real quick once max finally loads. But yeah, Brian, if you want to see how to do this, check out the video. I feel like I've said that like 5 times to you today. So in the inspector, make sure you click on this little P guy right here. And a lot of times it'll just show up like this, where you like won't see all of the options. So make sure you hit the all button and then you scroll down to the bottom and hit the open and presentation button. Make sure you check that and then save it. And that's usually the thing that people forget about or they miss a little bit. So if you haven't tried that, Will, try that. But other than that, I'm not sure why it wouldn't show in presentation mode. And just make sure you save it after you click this button. That's kind of like the secret to it. I haven't used this in a while. I need to play around with it some more. Make a new version of this. But I think that kind of stuff is super fun to play around with, especially like sometimes you get like burnout on making music or producing and you're like, I want to do something fun and interesting and creative, but like I don't feel like writing music right now. this can be a really fun way to kind of like do some cool creative projects that's related to making music, but it's not actually making music. Yeah, that's the big thing. So when you save it, and then it just looks like all of the max coding in here, you know, it doesn't put it in presentation mode at all. Like it looks like this when you save it, where everything's kind of like that. The other thing that you need to do is put all of them in presentation mode. So like just make sure you, right now they're in presentation mode, but right click and hit add to presentation. That's the other thing that you would want to consider doing. Yeah, you can run audio into Max and then, you know, use that to trigger certain generative video stuff to do some kind of visualizer or whatever. That's totally a thing you can do. In my situation, I'm not doing that. I'm just doing what you saw in the video, which is using the envelope follower to move things around based off the audio coming through. But you can absolutely send what am I talking about? You can absolutely send audio in and then use that to generate stuff. That's totally a thing you can do. In fact, that might be a fun project for me to do soon. I think that could be kind of cool. Because I've not tried to make a visualizer like that. I've been using the fake method for a while. Cool. Well, I appreciate everybody who showed up for the stream today. Thank you very much for bringing lots of really good questions. I very much appreciate it. I will be back on Friday afternoon at the same time for the feedback stream. It's going to be the song sample pack song challenge feedback stream. However, if you did not do the sample pack thing, you can still send me a track and I'll totally listen to it. What's up, Rasta? You are just now catching me at the very end of the stream, but if you have any questions, feel free to let me know and I will hang out for a few more minutes just in case anybody's got some like last minute things they really want to talk about. Yeah, well, I would try maybe like save a new version and then see what happens then. It sounds like there's just like something going on with your presentation mode, or there's probably like one button you're not hitting in the process of saving it. So maybe start something new from scratch, and then it doesn't need to be a full max patch. Just like do a couple things, and then try saving that in presentation mode, and see if it works with a different patch in a different device, and see if that fixes your problem. Just to test to see if you're forgetting something. That's probably what I would do. Cool. Well, I am going to call it for the evening, but once again, I feel like I've said that several times today or tonight. Appreciate all you guys. Hopefully I'll see you on Friday. If not, I'll see you back here next Tuesday for another one of these office hours hangout streams. Yeah, no worries, Rasta. Yeah, feel free to come by whenever you want. Or one thing you could also do is like if you got a really burning question that you want to hear my thoughts on, toss it in the Discord, and I pay attention to the Discord, and I will get around to it either next on stream, or I'll just answer you in the Discord if it's something kind of simple. Awesome. All right. You guys have a really good evening, or whatever time it is, wherever you guys are watching from, and I will see you guys later. Thanks for popping by.